Hello, algebra class. Today we are looking at 7.4, which is radical expressions. And one thing I wanted to acknowledge is that there are a lot of new concepts in this one lesson. So we are going to actually divide it up into two parts. And the first part, we are going to look at simplifying number 1 through 8 and 15 through 22. And then part 2 will be the others. So please have that out. We're going to do several together. And I don't have enough space on here to do my work. So we're going to do it on, I'm going to do it on paper, but it will go with the problems from 7.4. So let's get started. What we are doing is simplifying each expression. Now, you've been simplifying things for many years now. The first thing that really you started simplifying was a fraction. And a fraction like 4/8, how you would simplify it is you would divide by 4 over 4. Remember, 4 over 4 is the same thing as 1. So 4 over 8, in essence, is like dividing by another form of 1. And you would get 1/2. And the gist is 4/8 and 1/2 proportionally are the same amount. So it is simplified. And how we simplified it is by factoring out of 4. So when we simplify radical expressions, we are simplifying something under a radical sign. So let's do 2 together. If I am simplifying the square root of 40, I am dealing with square roots. So what I am trying to do is factor out square numbers from this. So my first step is to look at 40 and think, what factor of 40 is also a square number? Well, what are our square numbers? Our square numbers are 1. Our square numbers are 4, 9, 16, 25, etc. So any of these square numbers factors of 40? Well, yes, 4. So what I need to think of the square root of 40 is I need to think of it as the square root of 4 times 10. Okay? And I'm just doing this for clarity's sake. This is the same thing. All I did was separate it out. The square root of 4 times the square root of 10. That's the same thing here. Well, the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 10, well, 10 is not a square number. 10 does not have, other than 1, 10 does not have any square factors. So the square root of 10 is considered in simplest form. So the square root of 40, what it simplifies is 2 times the square root of 10. All right, let's look at another one. Let's say we've got, this is not on your, well, this is not in your book, but just to do one more, let's say we've got the square root of 48. Okay. What we are looking for is a square number that that is a factor of 48. And it really helps to look for the largest square number. Well, I know 4 is a factor of 28, or 48, excuse me. 9 is not, but 16 is. So it is the, so 48 is 16 times 3. So the square root of 16 is 4. So I'm going to factor out of 4. And what is left is the square root of 3. So the square root of 48 simplifies to 4 times the square root of 3. Let's look at number 4. Number 4 is the square root of 5 times the square root of 60. Now, since they're both under the square root sign, that is the same thing as 5 times 60. All I did was write it in a different form. Well, we can multiply 5 times 60, and that is 300. So this is the same as the square root of 300. So I think, what is my largest square number that is a factor of 300? Well, 100 is a square number and a factor. So we're going to separate 300 into 100 times 3. I seem to have frozen. There we go. So the square root of 100 is 10. So I can factor out a 10. 3 is in simplest form. So the square root of 5 times the square root of 60, because they're both under the square root sign, you can multiply what's under it, and that gives you the square root of 300. 300 is 100 times 3. The square root of 100 is 10. The square root of 3 is simplest form. So there you go. Let's look at 5. 5 has 2 times the square root of 3 times 3 times the square root, 3 times the square root of 15. All right, when you have, I think this is a coefficient, you can multiply the coefficients. They're kind of like terms, and then you can multiply what's under the square root sign. So 2 times 3 is 6. The square root of 3 times the square root of 15 is the square root of 45. So I think to myself, what is a square number that is a factor of 45? Well, I know 9 times 5 is 45. So we've got, so 9 is a square number that is a factor of 45. So I know what the square root of 9 is. The square root of 9 is 3. I've already got a 6 outside of there. So when I factor out another number, you would multiply it times whatever's already out there. So this is the same thing as 6 times the square root of 9 is 3 times the square root of 5. 5 is left. We cannot factor out a square number. And then to simplify further, it would be 18 times the square root of 5. So again, for this one, you multiplied the coefficients, you multiplied your radical expressions, and you got 6 times the square root of 45. We were looking for a square factor in 45, which is 9. The square root of 9 is 3, so I'm going to multiply it by what's already out there, which gives me 18. 5 is what's left. There are no square factors of 5 other than 1, but it doesn't count. So it's times the square root of 5. I hope you're getting the hang of this a little bit. All right, let's look at number 7. 7 has the square root of 81, a squared, d to the 4th. All right. The square root, 81, is a square number, so I can factor out a 9 altogether. Now, the square root of a squared. The square root of a squared is a. The square root of d to the 4th, what you do with your exponent is you divide it by 2, because our root is the root of 2. We are finding the square root, which is a root of 2. So you divide by 2, a to the 2nd divided by 2 is a to the 1st, which is just a. D to the 4th divided by 2 is d squared. So this simplifies to 9ad squared. All right, let's look at number 8 as well. You've got the square root of 40, x to the 4th, y to the 6th. All right, so what I am looking for are square factors of 40. Well, 40 is 4 times 10. 10 is a square number. 4 is a square number. So the square root of 4 is 2. That's going to be factored out. Oops. 10 has no square factors other than 1. And x to the 4th, we are finding the square root of x to the 4th. So you divide your exponent by 2. X to the 4th divided by 2 would be x squared. Y to the 6th, finding the square root of y to the 6th. 6 divided by 2 is 3, so it's y to the 3. So that factored all the way out. That factored all the way out. So all I have left is the square root of 10. So this is your answer to number 8. I know these are pretty tricky, and this was super fast going over it. If you're not understanding, you can rewind, listen to a part, kind of pause the video, get an idea on that, and that should help you. I want to look now at 15 through 22. So let's just do the odd ones on that. So let's look at 15. 15 says it is 7 times the square root of 7 minus 2 times the square root of 7. Okay, in this we have 7 times the square root of 7 and 2 times the square root of 7. They both have, like, you have 7 groups of square roots of 7 and 2 groups of square roots of 7. So if you have 7 groups of square roots minus 2 roots of these square roots, you have 5 of them left. So when you have something like this, as long as your unit is the same, the square root of 7, square root of 7, it's the same unit. It would be like saying 7 trucks minus 2 trucks, or 7 inches minus 2 inches. The units are the same. So you can just subtract them. 7 units minus 2 units would be 5 units. So 7 times the square root of 7 minus 2 times the square root of 7 is 5 times the square root of 7. Let's look at 17. 17 says 12 times the square root of r minus 9 times the square root of r. All right, so we've got 12 groups of the square root of r minus 9 groups of the square root of r. Our units are the same, so we can just subtract them. 12 groups of them minus 9 groups is 3 groups. So 12 times the square root of r minus 9 times the square root of r is 3 times the square root of r. Let's look at 19. These were, 15 and 17 were pretty simple because we were dealing with all the same units. But 19 is a little bit trickier. Let's look at it. 5 times the square root of 8 plus 2 times the square root of 20 minus the square root of 8. All right, the problem with these, they are not in simplest form. So we are going to try to get them in simplest form. So I've got 5 times the square root of 8. Is there a square factor of 8? Well, yes, it is 4. So this would be 8 is 4 times 2. The square root of 4 is 2. So I'm going to multiply this times 2. Okay. 5 times 2 is 10. And we've got the square 2 under the square root sign left. So it's 10 times the square root of 2. Plus, all right, we've got 2 times the square root of 20. Does 20 have a square factor? Yes, it does. The square root of the factor of 20 that is square is 4. So 4 times 5. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, so I'm going to multiply this times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of 5 is left, minus the square root of 8. Oh, we didn't really have to do that. Oh, well. Let's simplify it anyway. The square root of 8. 8 has 4 as a factor, times 2. The square root of 4 is 2, so I'm going to move a 2 out here. So this is 2 times the square root of 2. All right, so now I have simplified it, and I need to now combine like terms. Well, 10 times the square root of 2 and 2 times the square root of 2 have the same unit, and the minus sign goes with it. So we've got 10 groups of this minus 2 groups of this would be 8 groups. So it's 8 times the square root of 2. I cannot combine this because it is different. It has a different unit. So this is as simple as it will get for number 19. So again, when you have different units, we want to get them in simplest form, because once we get them in simplest form, then you can combine them. All right, last one, number 21. This is a distributing problem. You've got the square root of 2 times, in parentheses, the square root of 8 plus the square root of 6. All right, so what we are going to do is let's distribute this. So the square root of 2 times the square root of 8 would be the square root of 16, plus the square root of 2 times the square root of 6 would be the square root of 12. And let's see if we're in simplest form. The square root of 16, well, 16 is a square number, and the square root of 16 is 4. Plus 12 is not a square root or a square number, so let's see if we can factor out a square factor. Well, 4 is a factor of 12, so I could factor out a 4 times 3. All right, the square root of 4 is 2, so I'm going to move a 2 right there. So it would be 2 times the square root of 3. 3 is left. All right, so that is 4 plus 2 times the square root of 3. All right, so what I would like for you to do now is I want you to try the ones that we did not do together on number 1 through 8, and try the even ones on 16 through 22. We will look at the other sections in our next video. Have a great day. See you soon.